Emily stumbled through the front door, her heels clattering against the hardwood floor, and collapsed into the entryway chair. The torn strap of her black cocktail dress dangled precariously off her shoulder, and the stench of alcohol mixed with a stranger's cologne hung thick in the air around her. Jake, her husband of 8 years, sat in the dimly lit living room, his laptop glowing faintly on the coffee table. His eyes, weary from hours of coding, narrowed as he took in the sight before him. Unwind after a hard day, huh? Jake's voice was sharp, cutting through the awkward silence that followed Emily's abrupt entry. Emily flinched, her cheeks flushed from more than just the alcohol. She tugged half-heartedly at her dress to cover her exposed shoulder. I told you I had that company party," she slurred, avoiding his gaze. "That was supposed to end hours ago," Jake replied, his tone ice-cold. "You've been ignoring my texts all night." Emily fumbled with her clutch, her fingers trembling as she pulled out her phone. It blinked with countless missed calls and messages. I didn't mean to," she muttered, failing to unlock the screen. Her voice cracked under the pressure of Jake's piercing stare. "Where were you really, Emily?" Jake demanded, his patience wearing thin. Her hesitation hung heavy in the air. She tried to summon words but stumbled instead, her voice faltering as she said, "Just with some colleagues. We grab drinks after?" Jake's jaw clenched. He rose to his feet, towering over her, his expression unreadable but his voice unyielding. "With colleagues? In a torn dress? Smelling like..." He stopped mid-sentence and took a step back as though the realization physically struck him. "Whose cologne is that?" Emily opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The room fell into a suffocating silence. "Emily." Jake's voice was low and guttural. "Tell me the truth. Were you with someone?" She shook her head vehemently, tears welling in her eyes. "No." "Jake, please, you have to believe me." "Then why does everything about this scream lies?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration building. "Do you know how long I sat here tonight waiting for you, worrying about you? And this is how you come home." Emily broke into quiet sobs, but Jake didn't reach for her. Instead, he picked up her purse, turned it upside down, and let its contents spill onto the floor. Lipstick, loose change, and receipts scattered across the hardwood. He crouched down, sifting through the mess. "You don't trust me," Emily whispered, her voice shaking. Jake ignored her, his fingers pausing as they hovered over a crumpled napkin with a name scrawled on it. His eyes narrowed as he read it aloud. "Mike?" Emily's sobs turned into a frantic protest. "It's nothing. Just someone from work." "Is it his cologne I smell?" Jake interjected, holding up the napkin. "Is he the one who ripped your dress?" "No," she screamed, but the tears betrayed her. She folded in on herself, wrapping her arms around her body as if to shield herself from the mounting accusations. Jake's face twisted with anguish. He threw the napkin onto the coffee table, pacing the room as he tried to piece together the situation. "God, Emily, do you even understand what this looks like? What it feels like to see you like this? To wonder." "I'm sorry," she blurted out, cutting him off. "I made a mistake, okay? I just needed to feel alive for a moment. Work has been unbearable and I felt invisible." Jake stopped mid-stride, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of disbelief and pain. "So this is your solution? Going out, getting drunk, and coming home like this? Is that what our marriage has come to?" Emily collapsed into a heap of tears, her sobs echoing in the room. Jake stood frozen, his mind racing as anger and heartbreak battled for dominance. The weight of unspoken doubts and fears pressed down on them both, threatening to shatter what little remained of their bond. "You've broken something tonight," Jake said finally, his voice trembling. "I don't know if it can be fixed." Jake stared at Emily, his heart pounding in his chest as his eyes roved over her disheveled appearance. Her dress, torn at the hem and strap, hung limply on her frame. The faint aroma of her usual perfume was overpowered by the sharp sting of alcohol and the unmistakable musk of cologne he didn't recognize. It wasn't his, and he knew with absolute certainty that it wasn't hers. Emily shuffled awkwardly under his scrutiny, brushing past him to pick up the purse he'd dumped onto the floor. Her trembling hands gathered her belongings, lipstick rolling under the couch, crumpled receipts, the napkin with the scrawled name he had discovered earlier. "Can we not do this right now?" she murmured, her voice thick with exhaustion and something Jake couldn't quite place. Shame, perhaps. "I'm tired." "Tired," Jake repeated, his voice low and biting. He watched her closely, noting every fidget, every nervous glance. She didn't meet his eyes. "You're tired after, what? A wild night out? A party so intense you came home smelling like another man?" Her shoulders tensed at his words, and she froze mid-movement. "Jake, please," she whispered. "I told you it was a work thing. And I told you that doesn't add up," he snapped, stepping closer. The anger he had been trying to suppress since she stumbled through the door was now boiling over. "Do you expect me to believe you went to a company party, unwound, and somehow ended up coming home like this? A torn dress, alcohol on your breath, and that cologne?" He leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Who is he, Emily?" Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with indignation and fear. "No one," she shot back, her voice cracking. "There's no one else. Why do you keep accusing me?" Jake shook his head, incredulous. "Do you think I'm an idiot?" he asked, his voice shaking. "You come home like this and I'm supposed to just nod and smile? Pretend I don't notice the glaring signs staring me in the face?" Emily dropped her purse onto the couch, running a hand through her disheveled hair. "I don't know what you want me to say," she cried. "I told you the truth." "The truth," Jake echoed bitterly. He began pacing the room, his mind racing through the inconsistencies. "The truth would explain why you ignored my calls, why you couldn't even bother to send a text. The truth would explain." He gestured toward her, his hand trembling. "This." Emily's lips quivered, and her eyes darted toward the floor. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she muttered weakly. Jake froze mid-step, his anger sharpening. "Out of proportion?" He let out a humorless laugh. "Emily, you came home looking like you've been in a bar fight, or worse, and you're telling me I'm overreacting? What am I supposed to think? That this is normal? That I should just ignore it?" "Yes," she shouted suddenly, her voice desperate. "Ignore it, Jake. Just this once, can't you trust me?" "Trust you?" His words came out as a hiss, his fists clenching at his sides. "How can I trust you when everything about this screams lies? When you can't even look me in the eye?" Emily's face crumpled, and for a moment, Jake thought she might finally tell him the truth. But instead, she turned away, wrapping her arms around herself like a shield. "I'm going to bed," she said softly, her voice barely audible. Jake's patience snapped. "You're not walking away from this," he barked, grabbing her wrist before she could leave the room. She flinched, and he immediately loosened his grip, though he didn't let go. "We're talking about this, Emily. Right now." Tears welled in her eyes, and she yanked her arm free. "What do you want me to say, Jake?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "That I had too much to drink? That I danced too close to someone at the party? Is that what you want to hear?" His stomach churned at her words, at the way she seemed to grasp for excuses like a drowning woman clinging to a lifeline. "I want the truth," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to know why my wife came home looking like this, acting like this." Emily shook her head, backing away from him. "I don't know what you want from me," she said again, her voice trembling. Jake let out a frustrated sigh, running a hand through his hair. His eyes fell on the napkin still sitting on the coffee table. The name, Mike, stood out like a beacon, mocking him. He picked it up, holding it out toward her. "Who's Mike?" Emily's face paled, and she took a step back. "He's no one," she whispered. "No one," Jake repeated, his tone flat. "Just like that cologne is no one's, and that dress tore itself, right? Just like you ignored my calls for hours because you were, what? Busy networking?" "Stop it," she cried, her voice high-pitched and frantic. "Why are you doing this? Why are you trying to twist everything?" "Because it's already twisted," he roared, his voice echoing through the room. "Don't you see that? Don't you see what this looks like?" Emily burst into tears, her hands covering her face as she sank onto the couch. Jake watched her, his heart aching despite his anger. He wanted to comfort her, to wrap his arms around her and tell her everything would be okay. But how could he when every instinct told him that something was horribly wrong? Just tell me the truth, he said softly, his voice breaking. Please, Emily. Don't make me sit here and wonder. Don't make me question everything. But Emily said nothing. She just sat there, her sobs filling the silence. Jake turned away, his chest heaving as he struggled to keep his composure. The air between them felt thick and suffocating, heavy with unspoken words and shattered trust. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. If you can't tell me the truth, then maybe we don't have anything left to talk about. With that, he walked out of the room, leaving Emily alone with her tears and the growing weight of her silence. The next morning, Jake woke with a tight knot in his stomach, a feeling that had become all too familiar since Emily had stumbled through the door the night before. She was still asleep, or pretending to be, in their bedroom, curled into the blankets like a cocoon. Jake couldn't shake the lingering unease, the unanswered questions gnawing at him. His eyes drifted toward the dresser where Emily's phone sat, half hidden beneath a crumpled receipt and her forgotten earrings. Jake hesitated, his mind racing. He had never been one to invade her privacy. But after last night, after the lies and evasions, he couldn't stop himself. His hand moved almost of its own accord, picking up the phone. His thumb hovered over the screen before he pressed the power button. The device lit up, displaying her lock screen. A photo of the two of them from years ago, smiling, carefree. The sight only fueled his determination. Her passcode hadn't changed, one of the few things about her that still felt familiar. Jake entered it quickly, his heart pounding in his chest as the phone unlocked. He scanned through her notifications, finding nothing suspicious. But when he opened her messaging app, his blood ran cold. A string of messages from someone named Alex dominated the top of her inbox. Jake's hands trembled as he clicked on the thread. The conversation unfolded before him like a slow-motion car crash, each word a fresh blow to his gut. Alex, last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. Emily, me too. I felt so alive with you. It was perfect. Alex, you're amazing. The way you looked in that dress. I couldn't keep my hands off you. Emily, it's dangerous. Jake almost caught on. Alex, he won't. He doesn't deserve you anyway. You're too good for him. Jake's vision blurred as he read the words, his chest heaving with a mix of rage and devastation. Each line confirmed what he had feared, what Emily had so desperately tried to deny. The party, her torn dress, the unfamiliar cologne. It all made sense now. She hadn't been unwinding with colleagues. She had been with Alex. His fingers scrolled further up, his heart breaking with every new message. Alex, I love how bold you were last night. Sneaking away like that, it was exhilarating. Emily, I don't think I've ever felt that free. You make me feel like a different person, Alex. Alex, you are different. You're special. Jake's lucky he doesn't know what he's losing. Emily, I hate hiding this, but I don't want to hurt him. He's good to me in his way. Jake slammed the phone onto the coffee table, the loud clack breaking the silence of the morning. His head dropped into his hands, his breath coming in ragged gasps. How could she? How could the woman he had loved, the woman he had built a life with, do this to him? The texts weren't just about physical betrayal, they revealed something deeper, more humiliating. Emily wasn't just unfaithful, she was rewriting their entire marriage in secret conversations with another man, stripping Jake of his worth piece by piece. But the worst came as Jake forced himself to keep reading, compelled by a masochistic need to know everything. Alex, when can we do it again? I need to feel you, Emily. Emily, I'm not sure. Jake's been suspicious lately. He was up waiting for me when I got home. Alex, let him be suspicious. What's he going to do? You deserve happiness. You deserve me. Emily, I don't know Alex. He's a good guy. I feel awful about this, but... Alex, but you don't love him anymore, do you? Emily, I don't know. It's complicated. What we have feels so real, so right. Jake couldn't read any further. He threw the phone down again, this time with enough force to make it slide across the table and tumble to the floor. Emily stirred upstairs, but Jake didn't care if she woke up. He felt like his chest was being ripped open, every word from those messages carving into him. It wasn't just the affair, it was the way Emily talked about him, dismissing him as if their years together meant nothing. Jake stood abruptly, pacing the room as anger overtook his heartbreak. He could still see the texts in his mind, hear Alex's smug words. He doesn't deserve you. You're too good for him. And Emily, his Emily, had let that man degrade him without protest. She had even agreed in her way, by continuing the affair. A sudden wave of nausea hit him, and he braced himself against the wall, his mind spinning. The humiliation was unbearable. Not only had his wife betrayed him, but she had done so in a way that stripped him of dignity. She had let another man into the life they shared, let him mock Jake while she played along. Jake? Emily's voice called softly from upstairs. The sound of her bare feet on the staircase sent a fresh surge of anger through him. He couldn't look at her, couldn't bear to see her face after what he'd just read. Don't come down here, he barked, his voice harsher than he intended. Emily paused on the stairs, her tone uncertain. What's wrong? What's wrong? Jake turned to face her, his eyes blazing with fury. You tell me, Emily. Why don't you explain what's really been going on with you and Alex? Her face went pale, and she gripped the banister for support. What are you talking about? Don't lie to me, Jake shouted, stepping toward her. I read your messages, Emily. All of them. I know everything. Emily's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Her hands shook as she clutched the banister tighter, her eyes filling with tears. Jake. Don't, he interrupted, his voice cold. Don't you dare try to justify this. Don't you dare try to make excuses. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she stepped closer. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered. I was lonely and... Lonely? Jake laughed bitterly. You were lonely, so you decided to destroy our marriage? You were lonely, so you ran into the arms of some guy who thinks I'm a joke? Emily flinched at his words, but Jake didn't stop. The dam had broken, and years of frustration and hurt poured out. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? To read those messages, to see the way you talk about me with him? Do you even care what this has done to me? I care, she cried, her voice desperate. I care about you, Jake. I didn't want to hurt you, but you did, he snapped. You hurt me more than I ever thought possible. And the worst part? You didn't even have the decency to hide it well. Emily's sobs filled the room, but Jake felt no sympathy. He turned away from her, his chest heaving as he tried to regain control of his emotions. You've destroyed us, Emily. I don't know if there's any coming back from this. Emily's sobs echoed in the living room as Jake stood by the window, staring out at the world beyond their shattered home. He could feel her presence behind him, her anguish pressing against his back like a heavy weight, but it didn't soften the anger that roared inside him. The messages from Alex replayed in his mind, each line cutting deeper than the last. He spun around suddenly, his voice sharp and unwavering. Why, Emily? Why did you do it? Emily froze, her tear-streaked face pale. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. She seemed to shrink under Jake's piercing glare, her hands wringing the hem of her sweatshirt as if she could squeeze an answer from the fabric. Don't stand there and play innocent, Jake barked, his frustration mounting. I saw the messages. I know about Alex. So stop lying and tell me the truth. Her eyes widened, and for a moment he thought she might come clean. But then she shook her head, her voice trembling as she said, Jake, you've got it all wrong. Alex is just a friend. Those messages. Don't insult my intelligence. Jake roared, slamming his fist against the wall. The sound made her jump, and a fresh wave of tears spilled from her eyes. I read them, Emily. I saw every disgusting word. Do you think I can't understand what I couldn't keep my hands off you means? Jake, it's not what you think, she pleaded, her voice cracking. You're twisting everything. I'm twisting everything? He let out a bitter laugh, pacing the room like a caged animal. You're the one sneaking around lying to my face, and I'm the one twisting things? Unbelievable. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, her voice rising defensively. You don't understand. It's not like I planned for this to happen. You what? Jake interrupted, his tone icy. You accidentally fell into an affair? You accidentally let him tell you I don't deserve you? Explain that one to me, Emily, because I'm dying to know how this isn't your fault. Her expression twisted with anger, and she straightened, her voice trembling with a mixture of guilt and defiance. Fine, she snapped. You want the truth? I was lonely, Jake. You were never around. All you cared about was your work. Jake's jaw clenched as her words hit him like a slap to the face. Are you seriously blaming me for this? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. You're the one who betrayed me, and now you're trying to make it my fault? You're always on your computer, she shot back, her voice growing louder. Always working, always coding, always too busy for me. Do you know how many nights I sat here alone, wondering if you even noticed I existed? Jake's anger boiled over, and he took a step closer to her, his voice cutting through her defenses like a blade. So your solution was to cheat on me? To destroy everything we built together? If you were so lonely, why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't you tell me how you felt instead of running to him? Emily's lip quivered, but she didn't back down. Because you wouldn't have listened, she screamed. You never listened, Jake. You're so wrapped up in your own world that you don't even see me anymore. Jake's breath hitched, her words a harsh reminder of the growing distance between them. But he refused to let her deflect the blame. Don't act like I forced you to cheat, he said, his voice quieter now but no less intense. You made a choice, Emily. You chose to lie to me, to betray me. That's on you, not me. Her tears fell faster, but her defiance didn't waver. I was desperate, she cried. I needed someone who made me feel alive, who made me feel wanted. You haven't touched me in months, Jake. Do you even know how that feels? His chest tightened, the weight of her accusations pressing down on him. He wanted to shout that he did know, that he had felt the same loneliness, the same ache for connection. But that didn't justify what she had done. You should have come to me, he said finally, his voice raw. You should have given me the chance to fix things, to be the husband you needed. Instead, you chose to throw it all away for some guy who doesn't care about you the way I do. Emily shook her head, her sobs choking her words. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't want to hurt you. Jake stared at her, his anger giving way to a deep, suffocating sadness. But you did, he said quietly. You didn't just hurt me, Emily. You humiliated me. You made me question everything about us, about myself. Do you even understand what that feels like? She sank onto the couch, her face buried in her hands as her sobs shook her body. I'm sorry, she whispered. I don't know how to fix this. Jake turned away, his hands trembling as he gripped the back of the armchair for support. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted with his heart, had torn his world apart. And now she sat there, apologizing but refusing to take full responsibility, blaming him for her choices. I don't know if this can be fixed, he said finally, his voice hollow. You've broken something, Emily. Something that might not be reparable. Her sobs grew louder, but Jake couldn't bring himself to comfort her. The pain was too fresh, the betrayal too raw. He walked to the window, staring out at the bright morning sun, a cruel contrast to the darkness inside him. Behind him, Emily's cries filled the silence, but they brought him no solace. He felt hollow, like a man who had lost everything he once held dear. The woman he loved was still there, but the trust, the bond they had shared, it was gone, shattered beyond recognition. And Jake didn't know if he could ever find a way to piece it back together. Jake stood by the window, staring blankly at the world outside, his reflection faint in the glass. Inside, the house felt eerily quiet except for Emily's muffled sobs from the couch. Her cries, once a sound that would have broken his heart, now only grated on his nerves. He had given her everything. His trust, his love, his life, and she had shattered it all with a few careless choices. He turned slowly, his jaw clenched, his voice like steel as he broke the silence. Emily, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, we're done. Her sobs halted abruptly, and she looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes, her face a mask of disbelief. Jake, no, she whispered, shaking her head. We can work through this. I'll do anything. Please, just give me another chance. Jake crossed his arms, his expression hard. Another chance? To do what? To lie to me again? To sneak around and make a fool of me? He let out a bitter laugh, the sound cutting through the tension in the room. I can't forgive this, Emily. I won't. Emily scrambled to her feet, desperation in her every movement. It was a mistake, she cried, reaching for him. I wasn't thinking clearly. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. He took a step back, avoiding her touch. The sight of her, the woman he once adored, now filled him with a mix of anger and disgust. You didn't mean for it to happen? He repeated, his voice rising. You didn't mean to send those messages? You didn't mean to let another man tell you I wasn't good enough? Spare me, Emily. You knew exactly what you were doing. Tears streamed down her face, and she clasped her hands together as if in prayer. I'll make it right, she pleaded. I'll quit my job. I'll cut off all contact with Alex. I'll do whatever it takes. It's too late, Jake said coldly. Do you even hear yourself? You want me to believe you now after all the lies? You want me to trust you again when you destroyed the very foundation of our marriage? There's no coming back from this. Emily shook her head violently, her voice breaking. Please, Jake. Please don't throw away everything we've built together. I love you. Love? Jake's voice dripped with bitterness. You don't do this to someone you love. You don't humiliate them, betray them, and then expect them to just move on like nothing happened. He gestured around the room, his hands trembling. This house, our life, it's all tainted now. I can't even look at you without seeing your lies. Emily's knees buckled, and she sank back onto the couch, her sobs filling the room again. What do you want me to do? She choked out. Tell me and I'll do it. Anything, Jake. Just don't leave me. Jake's voice was steady and final as he delivered the blow. You're the one leaving, Emily. Her head shot up, her eyes wide with shock. What? I want you to pack your things and leave, he said firmly. Today. Emily scrambled to her feet again, panic overtaking her. You can't mean that, she said, shaking her head. This is my home too. Where am I supposed to go? You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy our marriage, Jake snapped. I don't care where you go, Alex's place, a friend's couch, a hotel. It's not my problem anymore. She stared at him, her expression shifting from desperation to defiance. You're throwing me out like I'm nothing? After all these years, you're just done? Yes, Jake said without hesitation. Because you've made it clear that I mean nothing to you. If I did, you wouldn't have done this. Emily clenched her fists, her voice trembling with anger. You're being cruel, Jake. I made a mistake, but you're punishing me like I'm the worst person in the world. You betrayed me, Jake said, his voice low and firm. You betrayed us. Don't stand there and act like you're the victim. You did this, Emily. You made this choice. Now you have to live with the consequences. Her resolve crumbled again, and she broke into fresh sobs, clutching at her chest as if she could physically hold herself together. Please, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Please don't do this. Jake's expression didn't waver. Pack your things, he said again. And don't come back. Emily stood frozen for a moment, her tears streaming down her face. Then, without another word, she turned and walked toward the bedroom. Jake listened to the sound of drawers opening and closing, of zippers and rustling fabric. Each noise was like a nail in the coffin of their relationship. When she returned, her suitcase dragging behind her, she paused in the doorway, her face pale and tear-streaked. I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. For everything. Jake didn't respond. He didn't trust himself to speak, afraid that if he did, the anger and heartbreak would overwhelm him. Instead, he turned his back on her, staring out the window once more. The door clicked shut behind her, and the house fell into a heavy silence. Jake stood there for a long time, his hands clenched at his sides, his chest tight with a mix of relief and unbearable sadness. He had made the right choice. He knew that. But it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. In the stillness, the weight of her betrayal settled over him like a shroud. The life they had built together was gone, torn apart by lies and broken promises. And now, he was left to pick up the pieces alone.